I wonder how many people I can upset in one video. This is going to be fun. Alright, the point of this video is basically just to do like a concise rebuttal to a lot of the really brain-dead, mind-numbing bullshit arguments I see against Chameleon all of the time. Now, if you don't like Chameleon or don't want to use Chameleon, that is fine, but there is a lot of really, really bad takes on Chameleon and how it works versus whether or not you just don't want to use it. If you don't want to use it, just say that, but don't come up with crap, basically. So, in this video, I am going to be basically proving that 99% of the arguments against Chameleon are just absolute rubbish. And the first one of these is the only thing Chameleon has going for it is its talent. Like, if you remove the talent from Chameleon, it's just a dead AR. Wrong! On screen now is the old meta build with Dod-Foamath. It's what's called old Dod-Foamath, 44,191. All the specs are the same. We even have Obliterate back at 25 and Strikers is back at 1. Yeah, even Chameleon now versus what Dod-Foamath used to be, Chameleon is doing more. Works out to about 0.55% more. So the weapon and the build that held the meta for years, like 3-4 years, is literally outdone by Chameleon just at base now. And we've not even factored in the talent. Don't get me wrong, the talent is a huge part of why Chameleon is so powerful, but the simple fact that it's received one of the largest buffs to its base damage is insane in how powerful it just makes the Chameleon. Yes, of course, since then, even Dod-Foamath has received a buff to its base damage, so this is kind of like an unfair example. My point quite simply is the weapon that held the meta for like 3 or 4 years is outdone by Chameleon at base now. So it's not just all about the talent, there is more to it than that. The next one is kind of akin to what we've just discussed. It's more without the talent, literally every other AR is better. So if you have struggles with maintaining the talent, literally pick any other AR and you'll do more. This is very, very incorrect, especially now because of Chameleon's changes and buffs. For a start, if you struggle maintaining the buff, I don't think you picking a different AR is going to solve your issue of being trash. Sorry. The buff is ridiculously easy to maintain now. I mean, it was never really like a big problem, but it was problematic enough to it to not really be a considered weapon, especially with how low the base damage was beforehand. It was like 33k. But now with a huge increase in its base damage, along with the buff to how the talent actually works, it's a viable option both on and off talent. And just to show this, because one of the things that a lot of people love to do is throw IKEA's work at me, such as showing me this and being like, look how far Chameleon is. Well, Chameleon's far down because he's separated exotics from everything else. So if you actually put them all in together and then compare them, you get something that looks like this. I mean, don't get me wrong, at base, Chameleon isn't really going to be the top contender, but it certainly holds its own, especially when compared to other ARs within the spectrum. And just in case you can't tell, it's beating Elmo at base. So there is also that. My favourite part of that as well is a lot of people don't seem to read the percentage values. You see, the reason it looks like Chameleon has like a over 10% drop from other ARs is quite simply because Bighorn is absolutely crazy. If you remove Bighorn from the list, the difference between like Lexington, which is the top AR, and Chameleon is about 2.2%. That's it. 2.2%. Things then also get weird when we do something that looks like this. Now, what this is quite simply all of the exotic weapons come with attachments already on them that you can't play around with. They're there, they're fixed. So what happens if we then calculate what those attachments are? The base of the watch, which is 10% crit chance, 45% critical hit damage, give every normal AR like Dod-Foamath, FAL, the AKM mod allowing another 10% crit chance from 2 crit chance attachments, and another 10% crit damage from 1 crit damage attachment, and add that in. And the reason I've done that is because a lot of the mag size for these weapons are calculated at 50, which means we're calculating some attachments, just not all. So here again, Chameleon is actually kind of just above the middle of the pack. Like, it's literally near enough dead center. And again, the gap between a lot of these weapons and Chameleon is only about 2.5 to 3%. So you're not really losing much. And then when we start factoring in talents, it then gets even more crazy. And for those of you that are looking to try and get one up on me, yes, you might notice that Elmos has actually jumped above Chameleon now. But anyway, looking at talents, there's not a lot you can do to make up that gap. And you can get a considerable uptime on that talent, at least more than Killer can, which then begs the question of, well, what can you actually do to compete with Chameleon, even at base, because there's only like a 2% gap, with a decent uptime on Chameleon's talent, which makes it do over double at base what anything else can actually do, which, yes, you can close the gap through build and talent, but not to a point of where it would close that gap enough to actually overtake it. And it's not also like you need a considerable amount of uptime on that talent to actually even have it be usable. I would argue, honestly, for the time that you're actively engaged in a firefight with the enemy, if at least 50% of the time you have that talent active, it's more than beating most other, if not all other, ARs rather easily. And before someone points out, in like some of the smaller engagements, when just walking around and you just bump into like 2 or 3 ads, you kill them quick enough anyway that trying to maintain or bring up an argument of like, oh, but you didn't have the talent when you killed these 2 ads is a little bit of a dumb statement. Most popular talent in the game at the moment for your AR is Killer. You wouldn't have that active for your first one anyway, which is only a drop of like 2.5%, like I said. After killing that first ad, you might not get that talent active. If you do, good for you. If you don't, unlucky. You've now got one more ad, and the only way in which you would actively, if you did gain Killer after that, well, the engagement's over, so it's not like you had Killer active anyway. And then you go into the next engagement without Killer active, where with those 3 ads, I've already built up enough, some maybe, depending on Chameleon's talent, to get it up and running quicker than you would actually get Killer up and active anyway. And then due to the power of the talent on Chameleon, I'm able to maintain it quicker, more easily, and it refreshes out of combat, which means by the time I've cleared the second engagement, I can go into the third one fully buffed, where your talent Killer would reset. Perfect example on screen. Now for my favourite argument, and I didn't really want to get involved in this one, however, it keeps coming up, and I'm amazed at how many people just don't get it, and that is Chameleon is bad in PvP. Point 1, I don't cover PvP. I don't care for PvP, I have no interest in PvP. I have a few friends that will test on occasion something weird and wacky and crazy I've thought of in the PvP area, and quite some time ago now, I was meant to cover this beforehand, but I asked Elite Panda to have a look at Chameleon in PvP. He only went and bloody did it, and absolutely terrorized the Dark Zone for a lengthy period of time because of it. He did a lot of build testing, tried out a few different things. However, the main point that I would like to make throughout all of this is, if you're struggling with Chameleon in PvP, then I'm afraid to say it's because you're possibly not very good. The whole math behind how the builds work, both in PvP and PvE, are mostly the same. There is just one extra separate multiplier which determines how much damage you do in PvP. These are those multipliers, taken through an awful lot of testing from both Rousey as well as Prodigy Reflex. So thank you very much to those two for providing that information. And this is the build that Panda was running. I've added Lexington here as a comparative, but 4-piece strikers, a Cheska backpack with Adrenaline Rush, and a Fenris chest with Intimidate. I went through what build he used and did a direct comparison between Lexington as well as Chameleon. This is the math for those builds. As you can see, hopefully, there's like a 3.2% difference between them. There's not a lot of difference between them. I haven't factored in a talent on the Lexington or the talent of Chameleon yet. simply just because, one, I actually don't know what the optimal talent for a Lexington in PvP actually is at the moment. But secondly, once you activate the talent for Chameleon, it doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't matter what you've got on your Lexington. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It mostly doesn't matter what build you're running. It will end you. There's actually a clip in the video that Elite Panda made, which I'll leave a link in the description down below. I might be misremembering. It's been a minute since I've watched it, but I think it was either a 3-man team or a 4-man team. He killed all of them in one magazine. It was like 40 bullets or something, and all of them died. They went from full armor and full health to on the floor, wondering what the fuck just happened. And it's because Chameleon. Look, I understand what I've just said is probably going to upset a few PvP players, and if you're clicked away or furiously typing, just hear me out for a second, okay? The overall math behind how builds work doesn't change between PvE and PvP. It just doesn't. The only thing that actively changes is that modifier that I showed earlier. I put it on screen again now. So these are the multipliers. This is the only difference. So the fundamental way in which a build works between PvE and PvP is the exact same. The math is the exact same. And unless there's like a certain mechanic that is involved, if it works by doing damage, chances are it's going to work in both areas. My point here isn't that Chameleon is some sort of new hidden meta within PvP. I don't know, it probably isn't. There were a few problems that Elite Panda did flag up with running Chameleon in PvP. My point quite simply is, 9 times out of 10, if it works in PvE, it's going to work the exact same way in PvP. Which actively means if Chameleon is the strongest AR in PvE, it's also the strongest AR in PvP. The flip side to this is the fundamental idea on how you're actively able to manage those buffs. You see, at first when he was testing this, I was in his live stream when he was doing it. He took my advice of farming a landmark or two to get the buff active and then to pick a fight, so he would go into the fight with the buff active. This didn't really work. He managed it a few times, but it either came down to other players actively getting involved and either taking the stacks or starting the fight, or he couldn't complete the landmark quick enough to get and maintain the buff so that he could go into a fight with it. It just became too inconsistent. So the landmark or farming landmark idea kind of hit a brick wall near enough immediately. The next thing then came in trying to find a way in which he's able to reliably get into a fight with a player, build up stacks, basically just run around them, do the chicken dance while trying to get as much stacking done as possible. And then once you're fully stacked, that's when you actually just flip the switch and go full aggressive. This did seem to be a more viable option. However, with some of the more damage orientated builds, because he's not trying to kill them, he's trying to get stacks first, it did have the downside of being kind of like a 50-50 chance of you getting yourself killed because you're not going immediately full send, you're trying to build stacks first. And then on the other side to that, there is also the caveat of Chameleon having the issues of range and accuracy, especially over a greater range, whereas against something like a Lexington, it is obviously going to be more accurate at a greater range, so you have to get close. However, this was immediately mitigated by trying to force fights in a corridor or within a building or a closer proximity and forcing them to come to you through use of smart tactical play. However, once those buffs were active, there was nothing anyone could do to stop him. He came up against some of the more tankier builds that are designed for like the higher levels of regen. It didn't matter. He burned them down. He came across people that were using Heartbreaker and stacking all of that bonus armor. It didn't matter. He burnt them down. So there are caveats to it, but from what I understand of PvP, that's basically all PvP is. Someone hits you with a sticky bomb and they one-shot you. Cool, I'm going to put on like a jammer build. You put on the jammer build, which stops them stickying you. So they put on a DPS build because you can't fight back. Once they've killed you with a DPS build, you put on your tanky build and you do like a weird back and forth. Most of that does take a part in Chameleon while it's stacking. But once Chameleon seemed to be stacked, it didn't matter what build they were running. It killed them regardless. Whether they were tanky, whether they were a CC, it just burnt them down immediately. So, give it a go. Put Chameleon on in the DZ and run around with it. See what you like. I'll put Elite Powder's build back up if you want to copy it. Or you can go over to his video, which I do recommend you do. Again, I'm not saying it's meta. I'm not experienced enough in the PvP spectrum to know if it's meta. My point quite simply is it's not bad in PvP. It really isn't. It is a very, very viable option. It just takes a little bit of getting used to. And once you've built it up, you're near unstoppable, from what I can tell. Right, and now finally, now that I've annoyed everyone, on to the last point that a lot of people seem to make. Chameleon is bad. It has always been bad. This one actually makes me laugh quite a lot because it is very clear that either people just don't remember or people have spent way too much time watching clickbait. When Legendary missions first came out, the community took two ways in order to complete them. The first way was everyone just run turret and drone and hide, which, although got the job done with minimal effort, people found it long because it took like 40 minutes just to do DUA. Boring because you literally just put turret and drone out and go make yourself a cup of tea. And thirdly, it just wasn't engaging. Like Legendary got a really bad rap when it first came out because it felt like the only way for a lot of people to complete it was to just do turret and drone builds, which are just a complete snore fest. However, there was another side of the community that was like, how can we just casually walk through this in like 20 minutes? And what they came out with was 4-piece foundry, an intimidate chest, an adrenaline rush or bloodsucker backpack to get bonus armor, and then paired with 4-piece foundry for a lot of armor regen, the shield, and would you like to guess what weapon they used? Chameleon. The very first legendary speedruns in this game were hard focused on Chameleon, and we're going back years here, so this is before the buff, back when Chameleon's base damage was like 33k. It's kind of been a weird mainstay in more tankier builds that you would like to do some form of damage in. The builds where you can get up close and personal, utilizing a shield or any other mechanic, disorient, some form of CC, but still being able to do damage to a point of where you don't have to worry about the accuracy and optimal range of the weapon. Chameleon has been arguably one of the first meta ARs in the game simply just because of its talent. And people like to tell me that it's always been bad, considering it has always been a situational AR, and if used in the correct situation, it's the best AR, and if not used in the correct situation, it's been one of the worst. However, now with its buff and how it has changed, it's one of the best ARs or still a really good AR. Anyway, they are like the 4 main arguments that I see come against Chameleon that are just absolute weird, wrong, or wacky. And I even went out of my comfort zone just to prove a point about friggin' PvP, so damn straight. Ugh. Anyway, obviously Chameleon does still have flaws, and that is trying to use it at range, despite the fact that I'm currently using it at some ridiculous range and still annihilating things. But, you know, obviously there will be better weapons to use in that scenario. So yeah, if you don't like Chameleon for how it looks, which I think you're weird, by the way, I think it's like the best looking weapon in the game, for how it feels, how it plays, the overall stacking mechanic that it utilizes. I've seen a few people kind of wish that as you built up stacks, you got some bonus for it rather than having to hit like a threshold and then you get the full thing. I've seen some people argue that they would like it to like get an increase for each stack as it goes along, so it gradually gets more powerful, and then when you get the full buff, you get it for like 45 seconds and it turns off and then it doesn't refresh out of combat, which I kind of get because that way you're constantly getting something, which I don't know how that would compare to what we currently have. I quite like the fact that it refreshes out of combat because it means that if you play well enough, you can have like a permanent buff. So obviously there's a lot of back and forth on how this weapon could potentially work in the future, maybe, but I personally don't see it happening. And obviously the accuracy and range is obviously a huge drawback, which if you don't like it for that, that's fine. But yeah, there's some really weird and wacky arguments out there of how people think or feel about Chameleon, which is either massively misinformed or they're just parroting what their favourite clickbait tuber has told them. Anyway, that is going to be it for this video. Have fun. Good luck. Don't die. It's bad for the health.